Good day. Welcome to the CORY MORGAN Show. Getting towards the end of November and winter finally bloody arrived. You know, I like to complain and piss and moan about all sorts of things, and winter is one of them. It's nothing that can be changed, despite the climate change clowns claiming otherwise, but it's still something I can't stand. But whatever, just got to get over it and deal with it. So, guys, for those watching live, I see Wild Rose there, get in there, use the comments, send questions my way, comments. If you're watching this on Cowboy Channel or RFD TV, well, this is recently recorded, and you can comment if you like, but we're not there anymore. Thanks for watching. Let's see. We've got Warren Kinsella coming on in a little while. He's going to talk about a book he's got upcoming. It'll be an interesting conversation about more of the organized misinformation campaign going on with regards to that whole mess in the Middle East and Israel. Let's see what else we got going on. The AGM, I'll talk a little bit about that for those in Alberta with the Wild Rose Party. Wild Rose, holy cow, I'm out of date. United Conservative Party. We change parties all the time, one way or another, try to be conservative. And, this ties into a bit of what I'm going to go on about right now. And that's our Recall Act and citizens-initiated referenda, that sort of thing. It's been a long road for Albertans to get legislation for direct democracy, allowing citizens to initiate referenda and to recall elected officials. Getting some history here, guys. In 1936, the social credit government of the time brought in recall legislation, only to repeal it once it was used against their own leader. In 2021, the UCP under Jason Kenney brought in recall and referendum legislation to keep a promise, but he purposely set the bar so high it could never be realistically used. So early this year, the UCP government under Daniel Smith amended the legislation to set realistic bars for initiatives. Now, Alberta's organized labor movement's trying to blow the legislation up. See, recall legislation for elected officials is a great concept, but setting the bar for initiating it is tough. And it has to be high enough to avoid frivolous recalls, but low enough to be accomplished if an elected official has managed to upset enough of their constituents that there's just no other way to get rid of them. It is intended to be a legislation of last resort. If a person who's in an elected position has gone far off the rails, done something so terrible that most of their local constituents want them out of office before the next election, at least recall becomes a choice. If you want an example, search Dar Hetherington. It's a really interesting case from Lethbridge a few years back because she stayed in as crazy as she was, and those poor voters could not get rid of her. It's not meant to be used every time an elected person votes a way that local activists still care for, however, and that's what's happening right now. So despite being offered a generous settlement, Alberta's teachers' union was insistent on staying on strike while never clearly expressing their demands. Alberta's children were suffering due to lost classes, and negotiations were at a stalemate. So the UCP was forced to legislate the teachers back to work. Well, Alberta unions, through their activist wings, the Alberta Federation of Labour and Public Interest Alberta, decided to push back on this for abusing the recall legislation. They're initiating recall petitions against numerous UCP MLAs and may eventually try it against them all. Most, if not all, of these petitions are going to fail, and I'll explain why. The union-backed recall initiatives were inspired by disgraced former Redford MLA Thomas Lukaszyk's referendum petition. He garnered over 400,000 signatures, quite a feat from people asking to hold a referendum about nothing. Lukaszyk's initiative was asking for Albertans to spend the money and time to go to the polls to ask whether we want to keep things exactly how they are today. It's a pointless question and amounts to little more than a very expensive opinion poll. Lukaszych thought he was scoring points by using the system this way, but it might have backfired on him, because with a rephrasing of his proposed question, he might have inadvertently initiated a separation referendum in Alberta. Now, referendum legislation is in place to allow Albertans the chance to vote on issues when they become so important or contentious that it's best to put it to everybody rather than just legislators. Lukaszyk's initiative ignored the spirit of that. That said, it was an impressive feat to gather so many signatures. Well, let's not pretend he didn't accomplish that without a great deal of help from Alberta's unions. When petitioning for a referendum, the petitioners can come from anywhere in Alberta, and the signatories can be from anywhere in Alberta. That allowed Lukaszych to focus in highly unionized areas and zones where discontent with the UCP was evident in the polls. Recall legislation is different. With recall legislation, not only must the people signing the petition live in the constituency of the person being targeted by the recall, but everybody working on the campaign must live in the constituency as well. It's supposed to be a local effort, and if petitioning appears to have been funded or operated by outside help, the recall can be declared void. Petitioners must register with Elections Alberta, and nobody should be found without an ID badge proving they are registered and local. The unions can't bust people or money into the targeted constituencies. In some of the constituencies, they're simply wasting time. You've targeted Alberta Highwood, for example. Conservatives always finish with a report around 70% or higher there, and it's not going to be changing. There's no way a recall campaign will succeed there, and it amounts to nothing more than waste of time and basically harassment. What these initiatives do accomplish, though, is overload Elections Alberta. The head of Elections Alberta asked for $14 million to deal with this. Now, we should have some questions about that, too, because that sounds rather high when you consider the Gondek recall effort cost under $100,000 for the city of Calgary to deal with. But still, these initiatives will be a pain in the ass for Elections Alberta to deal with, even if they greatly exaggerated the cost of them. It has to be up to citizens in the end, guys. That's what it's about. So watch closely and report if you see a person petitioning in your area without an ID badge. Don't sign petitions out of politeness. This is serious business. Of course, if you really think it's critical your MLA must be recalled, well, it's your right to pursue it. Just stay within the rules. Direct democracy can be great. It works fantastically in Switzerland, but the process must be respected. Got to stand up and ensure unions don't kill the legislation as it's just getting out of the gate, guys. It's sad, but one thing unions hate, democracy, and it shows. All right, well, that's got me wound up today. What else is happening out there? We got our news editor, Dave Naylor, to bring us up to date. Yeah, you got a big list. I'm sorry, it's too long. I know.
Holy cow.
Eat the segment right up.
Speaking of elections, I hear you were one of the top issues at a recent election on the Siksika Reserve.
Yeah, I've been getting word about that from a fellow who lives on there. They're still quite upset with my trespassing case going on out there, which now the next court hearing is in January sometime. It's just going to go on and on and on. The chief on his re-election apparently has spoken on how he's going to crack down on fellows like that CORY Morgan guy and keep them from exposing whatever happened with the $1.2 billion that they got recently.
Exactly. And where can people see your video again?
It's on YouTube. If you search out CORY Morgan, and then I got a lot of videos I put on there. So if you just kind of scroll through them, you'll find one of it. I think I called it a critical tour of the Siksika Reserve or a Prairie Reserve or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good watch. I've seen it.
Yeah.
Well, and you're welcome for the plug.
I do appreciate it. Yes.
Do you mind if I get on with the news now?
Well, sorry. I don't mean to distract.
There we go. Let's start in all places, Hong Kong, where there's a real life towering inferno going on. It's erupted involving like up to 7 high-rise buildings. Saying 36 people dead already and hundreds up to 300 missing. So it's a real terrible scenes there in Hong Kong. The Quebec government has introduced a bill to ban religious symbols and no more prayer rooms in universities and restrictions on halal food. And that pesky little thing called the notwithstanding clause, that's what they're going to use to push it through.
Yeah, but it's a right when Quebec does it. When Alberta does it, we're ourselves.
Exactly. The big Celebration of Light fireworks festival in Vancouver is being canceled. Hundreds of thousands of people go to that on a nightly basis, but apparently they're out of money. So Vancouver is now the city that fun forgot.
Well, yeah. People want to see it back, reach into their pockets, I guess.
There you go. Speaking of BC, the one BC leader, Dallas Brody, introduced a bill into the legislature yesterday banning all pride flags and flags of all nations from BC public buildings, kind of like what Jeremy Farkas wants to do in Calgary. But that didn't pass first reading. Melanie Joly, you remember this big Stellantis deal, $15 billion from the Liberals? Melanie Joly, the industry minister, has been revealed she didn't even read the contract.
Well, could she? I mean,
there'd be big words.
Really,
there'd be some big words in there.
They could have highlighted.
But yeah, I mean, she's out there defending the contract. I mean, 3,000 jobs are going to be lost now, but she's out there defending the contract, and she hasn't even read it.
Yeah.
Speaking of fake, you remember that big press conference Mark Carney did in front of it looked like a home that was under construction to announce the Canada Homes building project. Turns out that was all a scam, fraud. The home was fake. It was just put up like the night before, and right after the press conference was over, it was taken down at a cost of $30,000. And our energy expert, Dave Winnick, is taking a look at time's running out on Venezuela and Maduro, and he's going one way or the other, as Trump says, the easy way or the hard way. But when he goes, that's going to be very bad news for Alberta and specifically the oil industry, because all of Venezuela's heavy oil will be flowing into those refineries in the southern states, and Alberta could be left on the outside looking in.
Well, it would seem one of the better ways to avoid that trouble would be if we got a pipeline to a coast somewhere and we could actually send it to another refinery. I don't know.
That's just radical thinking, Corey.
Yeah, I guess.
Radical thinking.
Sorry about that.
It'll never happen because the natives are against it.
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later too. But
I'll bet you do.
it's a sad state of affairs. And
Sorry, go ahead.
oh, nothing.
Are you all packed for Edmonton?
Well, that's what I was going to mention. Yeah, we're carpooling together.
We are. Are you bringing your swimsuit?
No.
No?
Well, the world doesn't deserve to see that sight out there.
Okay, I won't pack my Borat mankini then.
Oh, well, by all means, don't let me stop you. We're not bunking together, so I don't have to see it.
No, that's true. All right. Look forward to it.
But yes, it's a reminder, folks, the UCP AGM, you want to beat Dave. That's the...
Yes. Oh, yeah. We're bringing the whole gang from the Calgary headquarters, so it'll be... and you're going to talk about it, too. We're going to be hosting the biggest party in town.
Yes. As always, the hospitality suites. I'll give people a little bit of updates on how AGMs work. There's a lot of first-timers this last few years. They're getting so big now.
Exactly. More than 3,000 people going to this one, I think?
Yeah, and it was something like 5 or 6 last year, but still, 3,000 in Edmonton is something else.
In the middle of winter, yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate the update. I'll let you get back to the newsroom. I know you got to get a bunch of content up there before the weekend when you have to run off for this affair.
Indeed. It'll be a busy week.
Right on. All right. Thanks, Dave.
You bet, Corey.
All right. Yes, that is our news editor. This one, I'd like to remind everybody the way we're paying for all of this, and that's for your subscriptions. This is how we stay independent. So check it out, westernstandard.news /membership. $10 a month, $100 for a year. As I said on past ones, you can buy membership for somebody else, a Christmas gift. Spread the good word, spread conservatism, spread independent media. If you've subscribed already, we really do appreciate it. Thank you. And if you haven't yet, come on, guys, get on there. It's time. All right. Yeah. So, let's talk about that AGM. Things have really changed in Alberta as far as involved politics go. Like AGMs, even with the governing party, when we're talking back in the progressive conservative days, I think big ones were about 800 to 1,000 people. And that whole bar now is, as I said, 5,000-6,000 showing up in Red Deer, 3,000 showing up in Edmonton. Next year's is in Calgary. And it's great to see people getting in and taking part. But it's good to see people, if they're going for their first time, too, if they haven't gone to one, because they don't necessarily know what they're in for. Day one, there's going to be a bit of speeches from some folks pursuing board positions. That's one of the things you as a member will get to vote on, pick who's going to sit on certain board positions in the party itself. Then that night, that's where the Western Standard has their big thing. At the Expo Center, there will be a hospitality suite. Derek really blew the doors off it in Red Deer last year. People get together. It's just one big party. There's often a fair amount of cheap or free liquor for those who do indulge. And then I get to sit back and drink my Diet Coke and watch people overindulge. But it's a good time. Part of it is the social networking, getting together with people face-to-face, chatting, working on those things. Then the bleary-eyed, hungover souls will get together on the Saturday and sit through policy and constitutional debates, which can be pretty rough, but it needs to be done. The other thing, as people go to these AGMs, you should keep in mind that it's still, you're making your mark, but the caucus isn't bound by your policy decisions. If it's in the party policy, that's great, but caucus might vote otherwise later. Still, it's the time for you as a member, if you're a member of a party, I'm not, but to get in there and let them know how you feel the party should be going and what they should be doing when they're in there. And it's your chance to meet some of the MLAs and other movers and shakers. So be sure to come to the Western Standard Hospitality Suite or wherever we are. Come say hi to Dave and the rest of us. We're going to be there for the weekend. And chances are there'll be a drink or two for those, as I said, who do indulge. It's going to be a lively one, if nothing else. So let's see what else we were talking about. Yeah, talking with Indigenous rights, getting stuff to the coast, getting pipelines. That keeps coming up. Tomorrow is supposed to be the big announcement from Premier Smith and Mark Carney of a memorandum of understanding to potentially, possibly, maybe, kind of, sort of, get a pipeline from Alberta to the West Coast. And, it's kind of, everybody's more into an I believe it when I'll see it sort of situation with that one. See, Carney's talking out of both sides of his mouth. I guess that's typical for a Liberal. He's saying he's supportive of infrastructure. He's saying he's supportive of making Canada less dependent on the United States in the future, yet he won't stand up and do his job as a prime minister and get these things done. Now, this memorandum of understanding, if it doesn't at least clarify whether or not Indigenous people have a veto or David Eby can stop this infrastructure. I mean, the consultation and respect in these negotiations is, of course, important. But if they can't clarify that, guys, it's not getting through. It's just spinning wheels and going through the motions. Either way, I'll talk a little bit about that more in a little while. I see our guest in the lobby there. I've been looking forward to this. This is Warren Kinsella. He's been a voice in Canadian politics for a long time, quite active back when the Liberal Party was a different sort of party. I saw it as a respectable Liberal Party. I was a conservative at the time, but it was much different than what we look at today. And he's been very outspoken on the misinformation coming out from, just the world in general when it comes to the Israel conflict going on in the Middle East. And he's got a book coming up pretty soon called The Hidden Hand, The Information War and the Rise of Anti-Semitic Propaganda. So let's bring him in and have a conversation on that. Hi, Warren. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks for having me.
So, I guess I'll just start with the obvious question. You know, what inspired you to get this book in the works, and what do you feel really needs to be explained to people and exposed in what really is a much bigger information war than a lot of people seem to realize?
Well, as you pointed out to your audience just a moment ago, you know, my background, I've worked in politics for many years when the Liberal Party was a Liberal Party, and worked for Chrétien and ran his war rooms. So I know a little bit, I think, about campaigns and how to spot one. Maybe that's one of the only things I learned from politics is how to spot a campaign. So about the third week of October 2023, after the terrible and horrific events of October 7th, what I started to observe, and this was, Corey, this was before even Israel entered Gaza, began their ground incursion into Gaza. So before Israel had done anything in respect of Hamas, there were 2,500 protests around the world using identical signage, using identical chants and language, very organized, organizers who clearly knew what they were doing. And it looked to me like a professional political campaign. And I spoke to friends I have on both the left and the right, and all of them had the same view. Say, absolutely, this is a campaign. So the book I've written for Random House called The Hidden Hand, which you kindly pointed out, is about that campaign. I've got a documentary coming out about the same subject called The Campaign, and both of them are coming out in February. And the events of the past few days have reaffirm my belief that this is absolutely not organic. This is not a coincidence. This is an organized global campaign against Israel, against Jews, and against Western democracy.
And I guess something to cover with a lot of people we hear, speaking up in social media and saying, this isn't our problem. This is over there. This is Israel. We don't need to concern ourselves with it. But this is spilling over here, even if a person doesn't care. And I mean, I was mortified with what I saw when I went over there and mortified with what I saw before I went over there. But we can't afford to ignore this. This is infiltrating our colleges. This is infiltrating our urban streets in Canada, the United States, Europe. Like, this is a much broader thing than just where we're seeing the worst of the war in Israel.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The old cliche, and like a lot of cliches, it's true. First, they come for the Saturday people, and then they come for the Sunday people. And I'm an Irish Catholic. I'm a church-going Catholic, but I'm a Zionist because I believe that Israel, like Taiwan, like Ukraine, play a critical role in holding back the tide of autocrats and dictatorship and oppression around the world. So to me, strategically, it's critically important that Israel remains strong and remains a beacon of democracy in a sea of tyranny in the Middle East. But, what's become evident since October 7th is there has been a confluence of far left and Marxist elements who are extreme and in some cases violent, and also Islamist, jihadist, pro-Hamas elements, and they've come together in a bit of an unholy alliance to destabilize and to delegitimize Israel, but also to destabilize Western democracy. I think a lot of people, as you point out, have lulled themselves into thinking, it's just about the Jews. It's just about them. I don't need to worry about it. And that is not so. That is not the case. And what's become quite evident is that these people are organizing against all of us, and it's incumbent upon all of us to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Jewish brothers and sisters and protect them against what is an anti-Semitic wave, but also protect Western democracy and our way of life.
Well, and that thinly veiled anti-Semitism, they'll like to cloak the amount of hate, even though it's so thinly veiled, it's hard to hide. But to use the word Zionist as a substitute for Jew, a lot of people, I think, don't necessarily even understand what Zionism what it means. I mean, they've turned it into a term as if it's some sort of extreme position. I mean, at its very core, the bottom line is, do you support Israel's right to exist? If that's the case, then to a degree, you're a Zionist. And people have to understand the opponents in this case want Israel wiped off the map. They don't want a two-state solution. They don't want to see actual peace. They want nothing less than the complete elimination of Israel as an independent state.
And now you raise an important point. Let's examine that word Zionist. Why am I a Zionist? My daughter's Indigenous. My daughter is a citizen of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation in the Yukon. And I believe that she and the other members of that band have an inalienable right to the land that has been theirs, for millennia. And she's Indigenous to that place, and I support her in that, just as I support Jews. That's what it means to be Zionist. It's believing that people who are Indigenous to a certain place deserve to be Indigenous to that place. And, what the far left and what these jihadist elements have done very successfully is equate Zionism with racism. And, no less an authority than Dr. Martin Luther King pointed out, because he was a Zionist as well, is when you're talking about anti-Zionism, you're really talking about racism. When you say that you oppose Zionism, you're really an anti-Semite. And that's no less an authority than Dr. King. So, I think that people really need to look at what these terms mean. It just simply means that Jews have a homeland like everybody else does. And they're entitled to this tiny, tiny piece of the Middle East, and that they deserve to be able to defend themselves. And, that's all that it means to be a Zionist.
So, with this misinformation and it's impacting elected officials, I mean, this is a big battle going on. I watched a while back, actually, a documentary on the Yom Kippur War, and it was funny how you could basically just change the dates and see the international reaction to Israel defending itself was exactly the same. Within days of them being attacked, Israel defending itself, and then the world all screaming, "You've got to stop, you've got to stop, you've got to stop." How do you counter that? That's what you're working on, that kind of getting to the soul of your book. How do we counter the misinformation or counter the narrative that's really so broken right now with this issue?
Well, Golda Meir, who was the original Iron Lady of politics, who was the Prime Minister of Israel at the time of the Yom Kippur War, said most memorably, I'm not quoting her exactly, but it's much better to be a Jew who is isolated and vilified than to be somebody who's dead and admired. And, I think that is, both of us have been to Israel on missions for the media, and we've seen that they regret, they are sad about the fact that so much of the world is turned against them for all kinds of reasons that you and I can discuss, but they are determined to survive. And, that is their right. That's enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, no less, is that a nation that is under attack in the way that Israel was on October 7th, 2023, is entitled to defend themselves. And, Israel did not start that war. The ceasefire that was in place was broken by Hamas, which is a designated terrorist entity around the world. They did that. They killed 1,200 men, women, children, and babies. They kidnapped 251 people. They sexually violated 200 Israeli women and girls, and they injured, in some cases, seriously, grievously, hundreds of other Israelis and non-Israelis on that day. So Israel was entitled to respond to that in a measured way. And I believe, I'm not a military analyst, but I believe that they have responded in a measured and careful way. Against urban warfare is very difficult, as you know. And I believe that Israel has conducted itself with restraint and care.
Yeah, and something that's very difficult in this, both in the war on the ground in Israel and the war, I guess you could say, in the airwaves with communications, which is what you're working on, uh, because the enemy melds in with regular population, whether it's on the ground in Gaza or whether it's in universities or in mosques throughout Canada. We do understand that most people, Muslim people in Canada, have no interest in taking up terrorist acts and things such as that. But some among them are supporting this. We're seeing fundraising, charitable groups, and I'll put that in quotes, things that are going over there, which also gives, well, ammunition to people who truly are very intolerant of everybody who's darker than they prefer to see. How you carefully try to extract the extreme element from the moderates that exist. I mean, it's a very complicated problem.
And the constituencies that you raise an important point. The constituencies that they've been most successful with, obviously, unions, so public unions, not the private ones, academia, but most particularly the two demographics that they've been most successful in getting over to this global anti-Semitic, anti-Israel campaign has been young people. Gen Z from about 18 to 24, and millennials from about the age of 25 to 38. And those two constituencies in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe have been the target of this global propaganda campaign against Jews and the Jewish state and the West. And they've been very successful in bringing young people over to their side, really by focusing on one theme. For about 60 years, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith has been doing polling, mainly in the United States, but not exclusively. And the polling has always shown that if you were concerned about racism, you would also be concerned about anti-Semitism. And so they kind of moved on the same track. And about 5 or 6 years ago, what we started to see is concern and sympathy about anti-Semitism started to go like that with young people. So they still profess to be concerned about racism, but on anti-Semitism, they started to articulate points of view that were frankly horrifying. For example, 41% of young Canadians state that they support Hamas. Around the same figures state that they don't care if Jews, either in Israel or in Canada, are attacked for being Jewish. And so when I've done focus groups for our documentary we've done, and also for the book that I've written, They Hidden Hand, and I've said to these kids, like, some of the things you're saying and doing are anti-Semitic. Don't you see that? And they'll say to you, Corey, well, no, I'm not being anti-Semitic. I'm being opposed to racism. I'm fighting racism. They truly believe, and those of us been to Israel, just shake our heads when we hear this. They truly believe that Israel is a fascist, white supremacist apartheid state in the way that apartheid South Africa once was. And, those of us who have been there know you have Black kids who are in the IDF and women in positions of authority and Arabs in the Knesset and the judiciary and the IDF and Muslims as well. But the bad guys with this propaganda campaign have been most successful for one reason. They have depicted Israel as an apartheid white supremacist state when it is not. It is not. But that's what's convinced so many of these young people to come out and do what they say is opposing racism.
Yeah, and it just astounds me because so many young people today are very socially liberal. One of the things that was most striking to me one night in Tel Aviv was going out and people were out and having a good time. And there was a couple of men getting quite affectionate with each other on a bench. And good for them. I almost would want to take a picture, but that'd be quite a violation of privacy. But that's the last bastion, the only bastion of that sort of freedom in the entire Middle East. Like maybe if some of our North American young people would understand it, if you want to protect some rights, that's a spot that really needs it. It's the only liberal democracy out there, but it seems to be lost on them.
But this is the problem. This is the problem. Because if you dig down into the data, why do they think South Africa and Israel are the same thing? Why do they think that they're not being anti-Semitic? It's because of this. If you look at the data in Canada, in the United States, and in Europe, young people, so Gen Z and millennials, are not receiving information from magazines like yours or newspapers like mine. They're receiving it from online sources. And that's where the bad guys have gone. That's where this pro-Hamas, anti-Israel, anti-Semitic campaign has gone, is they, like Corey, they absolutely dominate online. For every pro-Israel message that's out there, quantitatively rather, there's about 90 messages opposing that. We are, those of us who support Israel and support the Jewish people, are being absolutely massacred online. And frankly, some of it we're to blame for. We've allowed this to happen. We've not been fighting back. And the bad guys, backed by money from Qatar, and as you pointed out a minute ago, from these far left NGOs and nonprofits and charities, there's this real alphabet soup of menace that's out there. They are financing this online effort where on TikTok, on X, on Meta, on all of the platforms, we are getting absolutely massacred. And Israel has, even though Israel is the most technologically advanced nation in the world in many respects, Israel has been terrible about telling its own story. You saw a young gay couple in Tel Aviv. I've seen the same thing, and I had the same reaction. We're both Canadian guys in Israel going, geez, I got to show this to the world. And the question you got to ask yourself is, why isn't Israel showing this to the world? And so, part of the war that we're in here, and this is going to go on for some time, is Israel needs to do a better job of telling its story and not just rely on guys like you and me.
Well, true enough. And hopefully they can start moving in that direction. Well, the time's gone quickly. There's just so much that can be covered in it. I'm really looking forward to your documentary and your book. Before I let you go, where can people pre-order and where are they going to find these when they come out?
The book is called The Hidden Hands, published by Random House, and you can get it Indigo and Chapters and all of that. It's on my social media if you want to click there. And the documentary, I'm not allowed to say which film festival is going to be releasing it, but it'll be in Europe and also in the month of February. So both the documentary called The Campaign and the book called The Hidden Hand will be out and available in February, but you can pre-order the book now.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your work on that and for coming on to talk about it today. And well, just for being a few of us pushing back against what you've identified properly as an actual organized information campaign going on. I mean, if we don't push back, they will win.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great. Thank you. So yes, guys, check it out one more time. You can pre-order and that helps with these things when a book is coming out. It is The Hidden Hand, The Information War and the Rise of Anti-Semitic Propaganda, and Warren Kinsella. And, this it really was eye-opening, as I said, when I'm over there. I still can't wrap my head around a lot of it. I mean, again, Israel's imperfect. I understand that. But it's if you're looking to be civilized, if you're looking at democracy, if you're looking at freedoms, if you're looking at rights, they are a world ahead of every country that surrounds them. And I look at these far left, it's the usual ones protesting for trans rights and this and that and everything. Yet they support wiping out the one and only little spot in the whole Middle East that provides the rights to minorities and people that they claim to support. As Warren said, then, that's really the result of a very effective information campaign. And you know what? I wanted to talk more because this campaign's been going on well before October 7th. It's just that really brought it to a head. And what is interesting, as he said, was look how quickly the anti-Israel protests sprung up after October 7th. I mean, a lot of people are making the excuses saying, well, it's because of Israel's heavy-handed response. Guys, within 2 weeks, they were still barely responding yet to the terror attack. They were just warming up. Yet the protests were already out there screaming and yelling and demanding death to Israel and that Israel stand down and Israel surrender and Israel just leave their hostages in the hands of those monsters. I don't understand it. If you're on social media and you to look at those things, and I got to admit, I'm seeing less and less because I'm on X. It's one of the prominent areas I communicate on online. And I would put things up, anything even pro-Israel, and I get the barrage of people going bananas on me. And the interesting thing was how many, and I block like crazy because I don't have time for them. It's hard. Lets them, I guess, operate uncountered. I don't know, but I can't have them polluting my discussion all the time. But the amount that have a little hammer and sickle in their profile, they really do. We're not even talking about the guys who say, oh, I just support Marxism, the classic idea of communism, that sort of thing, not the actual messed up, evil social or Soviet system. No, they are supporting even the Soviet system. These are hardcore extremists. And they're tied in, as Warren said, with anti-Western. That's what's got to be clarified in this. I mean, the ones in Qatar, the ones funding this, the extreme Islamists, they just want to disrupt. They want to see this spread. I put a video on my own channel recently just of stuff that I saw when I was over at the Nova Festival site and things like that. What I also wanted to point out to people was just how clearly all of the stuff, the kibbutzim, the Nova Music Festival, all of that stuff they targeted. None of it was military. Like, this isn't a regular war. They didn't go after military bases. They didn't go after military members. They targeted the most vulnerable citizens they could. And they did the most horrific things they possibly could do to them. They did, murder the children, rape the women, as Warren was pointing out, and launch thousands of rockets into residential areas. But why? I mean, they aren't completely stupid. They're crazy. They're extreme. They're murderous, but they aren't stupid. What did they have in mind? The reality is they wanted to make a larger war. They were hoping that Israel's response would be harsh enough that suddenly Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all the rest would jump in and finally come in and eliminate Israel from the world. And it's not going to happen. There's something some people got to realize too. Israel's not going anywhere. It's not leaving. Get over it. And I know there's some right-wing lunatics, conspiracy theorists, and anti-Jewish nut bars, and some of them follow my stuff and they comment in it. But they're just a loud minority, as are the Islamists. It's funny with, what was it, a great... what is that? Babylon Bee, I believe it was, but it showed a cartoon, and it's satire, of course, but it was a story saying, neo-Nazi and, pro-Palestine person get together and can't find anything to argue about. They really are just opposite sides of the same coin. But they do have an outsized influence on social media. They do have a large voice. As Warren said, Israel sort of let him take over the narrative, and it's got to be pushed back by them, not just us. This is my perspective, pointing out they scream death to Canada and the USA too. Yes, that's part of the point that, we kind of started this out. Don't think they're going to stop there. If Israel was gone, do you think those guys are going to stop? No. They hate the Western world. They're insane. They're extreme. They're Islamist nutcases. How do we deal with it? I don't know. But we can't pretend it's a problem that only impacts things over there. It will come over here. It already is. And it's in our universities and such. And it's frightening. We're going to see some interesting stuff. We'll go a little more broad, though, with Quebec, of course. They're expanding, Dave mentioned that, their secularism law. And they're going to use the, notwithstanding yet again. And, this is interesting. I'm kind of mixed on it, right? But it's only in public areas, like publicly owned, okay? Not out in general and so on. But they're going to ban prayer rooms in public institutions and colleges and universities. They're going to ban full face coverings like the niqab. Now, see, this is hard, right? Because if people have rights, and even if, let's face it, forcing a woman to dress all in black with a little eye slit there and live like that is vile. It's disgusting. It's 1,000-year-old crap. It's medieval. But if a woman willingly does so, she has the right to do it. Where's the government's role in telling somebody what they can wear and what they can't? You see, that's hard. And the woman, of course, she's going to say, oh, I'm willing. Well, you know why? Because they'll beat the hell out of her if she takes it off. We have honor killings that happen in North America with extremists. And Quebec isn't stopping women to be covered up in bed sheets and all that crap, that primitive junk that they do with Islam in general, but they're doing it in their own institutions, government-owned institutions, universities, colleges, saying, you know what, you want to practice that extreme stuff, you're not doing it on government property or on the government payroll. The Islamists are going to be pretty upset with that. Things I'll give to Quebec. Quebec doesn't beat around the bush. Quebec drives us nuts quite often, as is Westerners, that's for sure. But you know what? They just say, we're going to do this, and what are you going to do about it? And Alberta really has to be doing a lot more of that themselves. Ourselves. And it's going to be quite something to see their response to that. But the funny thing is the Canadian double standard too. You can bet they're not going to talk about repealing the notwithstanding clause when Quebec uses it for its umpteenth time. But boy, they sure all go bananas when Alberta does, right? And speaking of double standard hypocrisy, it's funny watching David Eby going bananas, right? So he's saying absolutely there's no way a pipeline is ever coming through BC to the coast. Not another one, nope. But he's also having a temper tantrum, and that's the best way to put it. Watch this guy's press conferences. He's like a 6-year-old, he's tall too, 6 foot something. So it's like a giant overgrown 6-year-old. But he's furious because Saskatchewan is going to be exporting its potash, which is a huge resource from Western Canada, through a shipping terminal in Washington. Well, yeah, we've got a premier on the West Coast who fights every bit of resource development coming from his east side. Why would he be shocked? EB be shocked when provinces start bypassing him? And getting back to authority. See, Canada is supposed to be a federation. And, here's a commenter, Mavro, saying, I think Carney's relying on EB to get in the way. Well, that's fine, but we got to hold Carney's feet to the fire then. Because if we are a federation, that's the point of the whole thing, right? It's an agreement, a contract, a constitution. It means there has to be some degree of centralized authority on some things. One of which is interprovincial infrastructure. A province can't block a highway, can't block a railroad, and can't block a pipeline. That's federal jurisdiction. Because if you can't have the federal government say that's just the way it goes, it's going through, then you aren't a federation anymore. So Carney, grow some testes and be a prime minister and lay down the law and say this thing is getting done. Or, well, we know the option I want to see. It's independence time. We're looking at a referendum coming up one way or another. And if we are blockaded still with mealy-mouthed weasel words from Carney and gang, then what's the point of staying? People say you'd be landlocked. We already are. Have a look. DJ Darkrobe, commenter again saying Alberta will never get a pipeline under the current federation. Well, yeah, probably not. So let's change the deal. And then if we're out of the federation, you want to know how fast you get the pipeline? Because then you say, you know what? We're going to put a very oppressive border crossing with BC with your products coming across us to the rest of Canada or the United States through that rail line and through those roads there. So let's talk. And I don't think we'd have to talk too long because we would realize that we have to allow each other's goods to get back and forth across our jurisdictions to get things done. We would do what the federal government's refusing to do, but it's not going to happen overnight. 8-6, because some other people saying, Smith needs to jump on independence, and I am with this commenter. It's not Smith's job to jump on the independence bandwagon. If we split the vote, we get Mayor Nenshi. We need to support her. Okay, so yes and no, I'm kind of in a way, I think it's Albertans' job to get on the independence bandwagon. Yes, fully. Smith's, no, she wasn't elected on that. And it is too divisive a subject for her to take on as a premier. Her job is to give us the mechanism. Give us the referendum, leave it to Albertans. Let's have that discussion for a year. Let's have an independence campaign. Let's have the campaign going on while these negotiations go on as to whether or not we're allowed to actually be a federation or not. But yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to warn people. If you're going to the AGM in Edmonton and you're frustrated, I know I am. I'm not a member, but I'm frustrated with the things the way they sit. Don't try and turn the UCP into an independence party. Independence parties fail. They always fail. Look at Alberta's history. I know I literally led an independence party into an election. And lots of them, have failed. No, I don't answer conspiracy theory questions, guys. So you can spare that in the comments scroll. Either way, it's going to be an interesting weekend. It's going to be interesting tomorrow because I do have word from a pretty reliable source within the government that, yes, the memorandum of understanding that they're going to be parroting and talking about and patting each other in the back doesn't have anything saying that permission from BC and the Indigenous bands is going to be required to get this pipeline through, because it isn't. Constitutionally, it isn't. The Supreme Court has clarified that many a time. It's not. So why is Carney getting up in the House of Commons and saying, or his MPs saying that they do need BC and the Indigenous? Well, again, one way or the other, guys, but that MOU is not worth the paper it's written on. If it's dependent on a premier from another province or Indigenous bands that are, come on, they're a mess, and you're never going to get 100% out of them. Why don't they clean up Cowichan first, and then they can get back to us about what we're allowed to and not allowed to do. All right. Well, that's my time for today, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're going to be at the AGM, like I said, come by, say hi. I look forward to meeting you. And if not, well, watch things online. Be sure to share this, of course, the social media links, and check out the pipeline that'll be coming on a little later tonight, and the rest of the stuff coming out of the Western Standard. Thank you very much. And we will talk about things. I'll break down the AGM next week on that show.